Hello everyone and welcome to Education Plus. Today we are going to discuss Kohler's insight learning theory from the subject Learning and Teaching for the course B.Ed. This is the 7th video on this particular subject Learning and Teaching that I have uploaded. To refer to the previous 6 videos, you can go to the playlist section where I have made a separate playlist for the subject Learning and Teaching. So let's get started in understanding Kohler's insight learning theory. What is insight learning? First of all, insight learning theory is proposed by Wolfgang Kohler. So this is the name of the person who proposed the theory. Insight learning is the sudden understanding of the relation between a problem and a solution. By learning through insight, the correct solution not only appears seemingly out of nowhere, but also repeated readily of subsequent presentations of that problem. Once solved, the problem, no matter how many times repeated, will no longer be a problem. So insight learning theory tells us that there exists a sudden relationship between a problem and a solution. And the key to solve the problem is to understand the relationship between the problem and the solution. Once a person understands the relationship between the problem and solution, that person can solve the problem how many ever times it is repeated. So this is the basic understanding of insight learning. To explain this, Wolfgang Kohler conducted experiments, and those experiments are very important to be understood. So they were, the first one, in one experiment, Kohler put a chimpanzee inside a cage, and a banana was hung from the roof of the cage. A box was placed inside the cage. The chimpanzee tried to reach the banana by jumping, but could not succeed. Suddenly, he got an idea and used the box as a jumping platform by placing it just below the hanging banana. So here you have the picture, the diagram that depicts the first experiment clearly. So now the second experiment. In other experiment, Kohler made this problem more difficult. Now it required 2 or 3 boxes to reach the banana. Moreover, the placing of one box over the other required different specific arrangements. So this was the second experiment. And then there was one more. In a more complicated experiment, banana was placed outside the cage of the chimpanzee. 2 sticks, one larger than the other, were placed inside the cage. One was hollow at one end so that the other stick could be thrust into it to form a longer stick. The banana was so kept that it could not be picked up by one of the sticks. The chimpanzee first tried these sticks one after the other but failed. Suddenly he got a bright idea. The animal joined the 2 sticks together and reached the banana. In these experiments, Kohler used many different chimpanzees. Sultan, who was the most intelligent of Kohler's chimpanzees, could solve all the problems. Other chimpanzees could solve the problem only when they saw Sultan solving them. So here we see 3 experiments, basic experiments that were conducted by Kohler. In the first case, there was a box that could be used by the chimpanzee to climb on to get the banana. In the second case, there were many boxes which had to be used in specific arrangements. The chimpanzee suddenly got idea that it could stack the boxes so that it could reach the higher height and then get the banana. In the third case, it's not there in the diagram, is where the banana was kept at a distance and 2 sticks were provided. It was such that one stick would never reach the banana, whereas if you combine the 2 sticks, you could reach the banana and get it. Now this was also possible for the chimpanzee to be done. First, the brightest or the most intelligent one of the chimpanzees could do it. After seeing that, after everyone noticed the relationship between the problem and the solution, anybody could do it. So this was the experiment performed by Kohler. And this forms Kohler's insight learning theory experiment. Now, Kohler concluded that in the solution of problems, his apes did not resort to blind trial and error mechanisms. They solved their problems intelligently. Kohler used the term insight to describe the learning of his apes. Insight involves the following criteria. The situation as a whole is perceived by the learner. The learner tries to see and judge the relationship between various factors involved in the situation, As a result, the learner is helped in the sudden grasping of the solution of the problem. So these were the conclusions that Kohler derived after performing the experiment. Now, for those who haven't watched the previous video on Thorndike's trial and error theory, it'll be better if you watch the previous video as well, as it describes the previous theory of learning by Thorndike, where it discusses or where it gives priority to trial and error. There are random trials that a person does to solve the problem, but finally, out of numerous trials, finally the person gets the correct method. Here, Kohler is slightly different from that opinion, and he is slightly against that opinion. Here he says that the apes do not blindly go for different trials and errors. Here, trial and error mechanism is not observed. He suggests that the chimpanzees or the apes, they think logically about the problem. They try to build a relationship between a problem and a solution, and once that is built, they can finally solve the problem. And this was insight learning theory, where the methods by which the apes could solve the problem was called insight. Next, therefore, learning, according to them, is restructuring the field of perception through insight. As a whole, insight depends upon the following factors. Now, these are the factors upon which insight depends. First one, experience, intelligence, learning situation, initial efforts, repetition, and generalization. So these are the 5 factors on which insight depends. Next, we have educational implication of the theory of insightful learning. Now, when it comes to B.Ed, usually from the examination perspective, when we discuss theories of learning, first, to understand what the theory tells us, then the experiment, and the most crucial part becomes the educational implication of all the theories that we have studied. Previously, we have discussed other theories of learning, and for them also we discussed educational implication. Here, again, when we discuss Kohler's insight theory, educational implication forms a very important part, even from the examination point of view. So, this theory brings the following important facts into limelight. The first one, these are all the educational implications. The whole is greater than the parts, and therefore the situation should be viewed as a whole. So whenever we try to understand a situation, understanding the situation as a whole is very important, rather than just understanding basic parts. For example, with respect to this experiment, the chimpanzees were there in a cage, and there was banana, there were sticks, there were boxes. Now the chimpanzee needs to analyze the entire situation as a whole, rather than just specifically understanding and analyzing the sticks, the boxes, or the banana. It needs to see the entire situation as a whole. Only then it will facilitate an insightful learning. The second implication, the use of blind fumbling and mechanical trial and error should be minimized. The learner should try to see relevant relationship and act intelligently, exactly as it was proposed in the experiments and the previous slide. The last one, the purpose or motive plays the central role in the learning process. Now, when we saw the experiment also, the banana tempted the chimpanzee or the apes for satisfying their hunger or for eating something. So that purpose led them to learn the process of fetching it from inside the cage. Now, likewise, in education also, the purpose or motive plays the central role in learning process. So these are the educational implication of the theory of insightful learning as proposed by Kohler, and this completes our video on Kohler's insight learning theory.